As we've seen throughout this conference, erasure is not just about the past, it actively shapes how communities experience the present. When history, identity, and even persecution are erased, it has real consequences, from misrepresentation in public discourse to exclusion from the very spaces that claim to uphold diversity and inclusion. The Jewish community knows this all too well. For centuries, Jewish people have faced systemic attempts to erase their history, their identity, and even their very right to exist. Today, we see these same patterns playing out, whether in the distortion of Jewish history, the delegitimization of Israel, or the growing normalization of anti-Semitism in mainstream discourse. To speak on this topic, we're honored to welcome two dedicated Jewish leaders who are actively working to combat anti-Semitism and strengthen Jewish identity in the face of erasure. Jade Steinberg G is a student leader, activist, and advocate for Jewish life and Israel. A sophomore at the University of Texas at Dallas, Jade is the president of Hillel at UTD, a representative for the Jewish on-campus student union, and a member of the Texas Holocaust Genocide Anti-Semitism Advisory Committee's Project 1525 Steering Committee. They co-founded Comets for Israel, a club that celebrates Israeli culture and spirit and are dedicated to fostering education, combating anti-Semitism, and strengthening the Jewish community resilience. Next, we have Josh Arbitaal G, who has spent his career working to make Jewish people safer in an era of rising anti-Semitism. He holds a master's in international studies focusing on culture, power, and social movements from the University of San Francisco, where his thesis explored arts activism as a tool of healing and solidarity in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. A passionate advocate, Josh G believes that in a world where anti-Semitism is on the rise, existence is resistance. Both Jade G and Josh G bring firsthand experience of what erasure looks like for the Jewish and Israeli community today, and we're grateful to have them here to share their insights. Please join me in welcoming Jade Steinberg G and Josh Arbitaal G.
Hello, we're gonna give one more minute to Josh. He's running a tiny bit behind, but he should be here in just a second.
Hi there. So sorry. It wasn't letting me unmute at first. So sorry about that.
No
Um,
worries.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much for having us here. I'm Josh Arbital from Stand With Us, and I'm joined by Jade Steinberg from Hillels of North Texas. And in just a sec, I'm going to share my screen. And Jade, is there anything that you wanted to share as we get started?
Well, I just want to say good afternoon. As stated, I'm Jade Steinberg, and I'm really honored to be here today to lead this critical discussion on anti-Semitic erasure of the Jewish and Israeli community. So as Josh pulls up, so as Josh pulls up the screen, I just want to bring up why we are here today. In recent years, we have seen an alarming rise in hostility towards the Jewish identity, particularly through the lens of anti-Zionism. Today, we're going to break down the concepts, break down what anti-Semitism, Zionism, and anti-Zionism are, and how these concepts contribute to the anti-Semitic erasure of Jews, Israelis, and Zionists alike. Understanding these concepts correctly is essential not just for Jews, but for anyone who values intellectual honesty in a world free of hate.
Thank you so much, Jade. And I currently have our guide up, and we'll just go through this. Essentially, we thought going through a guide today would be the most helpful, just to kind of define our terms and really understand even the similarities and where things overlap with our hate, with anti-Semitism and Hinduphobia, and how the mechanisms of that can sometimes present similarly. But we'll talk about that erasure of the Jewish and Israeli community, just like Jade said, and we'll jump right in. So, Jade, I think I'll kick us off here, right?
Yes.
Amazing. Okay. Thank you all so much. And before I get started, for those who don't know, I work for Stand With Us. And for those who don't know what that is, we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan that fights anti-Semitism and educates about Israel around the world. It is also such a pleasure to be here and be in this space with you all, as Hinduphobia is such an important topic to us as friends and allies to the Hindu community. So again, thank you for having us in your space. It's really a pleasure. So we'll start by defining our terms and definitions. Uh, on the note of erasure, it is very common that people try to erase different definitions of terms. That is one of the things that we deal with a lot, and I think seems to maybe be something that your community deals with sometimes as well. And so really defining our terms is one of the key parts of this move, of really educating on what anti-Semitism is. So anti-Semitism, and I'll just read it for you. Anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed towards Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, towards Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. I do want to highlight non-Jewish individuals as well, because I think that's kind of a confusing one for some folks. Essentially, let's say if someone is perceived as Jewish and they experience Jewish hate, that's still anti-Semitism. Let's say someone says a Jew like an anti-Jewish slur towards someone they think is Jewish, and that person that they said that to is not Jewish, it'll still essentially count as anti-Semitism, essentially, so we can hold that rhetoric accountable. And that's really important in that mechanisms of fighting anti-Semitism. So we're able to say, okay, that terminology is anti-Semitic, even if you said it to someone who isn't Jewish, essentially. So just wanted to highlight that really quick. In some examples below, and we'll get a little bit into the IRA definition, which is the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance most widely accepted definition of anti-Semitism. Here are a few examples below. We'll get into it a little more in a sec. Calling for, aiding, or justifying the killing of harming of Jews in the name of radical ideology or an extremist view of religion. Another is making malicious, dehumanizing, demonizing, or stereotypical allegations about Jews as such, or power of Jews as this collective. Uh, Especially but not exclusively, this could be the myth of the world Jewish conspiracy or the Jews controlling the media, economy, government. If you've heard that type of rhetoric before, that's an example of anti-Semitism, essentially labeling Jews as this overarching power. And then Jade, did you want to read a few of these examples?
Well, I mean, some of the examples that really stand out to me is denying the Jewish people the right to self-determination. And a common example of that is by claiming that the existence of the state of Israel is a racist endeavor. Another example that I find mind-boggling is accusing the Jews as a people or Israel as a state of inventing or exaggerating the Holocaust. But these are just a few of the many examples that IRA provides as a framework for identifying anti-Semitism.
Absolutely. And these examples are so important, especially as a guide to if there is anti-Semitism experience, just like Jade mentioned, you can kind of refer back to these. You can refer, oh, especially for even in our own community, it's helpful. But for those who are not Jewish, to understand what examples there are. So if they hear something and they're like, I'm not quite sure, they can refer back to these as examples or helpful tools to figure that out. And then we're going to scroll through those. We will also make this guide available to the organizers of the conference. And so this can be distributed, feel free. But we will move on to defining Zionism next.
So, Zionism represents the Jewish people's unbreakable bond and age-old desire to be free in their ancestral home. On a political level, Zionism is a liberation movement supporting Jewish self-determination in the land of Israel. There are a couple of key things to recognize about Zionism. The first is that Jews are indigenous to Israel. We have maintained an unbroken connection that spans thousands and thousands of years. Many Jewish religious traditions, holidays, and prayers are rooted in this land of Israel. Zionism is also juxtaposed with anti-Zionism. Anti-Zionism is denying Jews the right to self-determination in their one and only collective home by misrepresenting Judaism. And this is the new anti-Semitism.
Absolutely. And I want to kind of jump in and explain even further how, if we're understanding Zionism, because this is the definition, Zionism, it is that liberation movement of Jews returning home, just like Jade explained, to our ancestral homeland, Jews being from there. Jews, of course, are a diverse, multicultural group of people, and or what's understood as actually a tribal group with ethnic components would be more modern terms, and then a religious component as well, which is Judaism. Zionism is that collective shared liberation that brought us back home that has thousands of years old. There is also modern day Zionism, which if you're familiar with Theodore Herzl, and we won't get in too much to that, but that is we do have some other resources available for that. Uh, it is this age-old desire to return home. And Zionism has helped the largest land back movement in the world happen of Jews returning home to Israel. And so, with that understanding and what Jade and I shared, if anti-Zionism is anti that, then that's why, if that helps to kind of understand where anti-Zionism would cross over into anti-Semitism. In differentiating it a little bit from criticisms of Israel, it's not to say you can't have criticisms of Israel like any leveled to it like any other government or country, but it's this idea that Jews don't have a right to self-determination and this idea that Jews don't have a right to live free and safe and determine their future in their own homeland. That's what makes anti-Zionism a specific type of anti-Semitism.
And just as you said, unlike the criticism of Israeli policies, anti-Zionism seeks to dismantle Israel as a whole. And this has created a whole movement on erasing Zionism from Judaism, erasing this Jewish tenet from Judaism.
Exactly, exactly. And there's there's a saying that about different types of anti-Semitism. There's sort of there's the anti-Semitism that we saw during the Holocaust. That is the type of anti-Semitism that kills the Jew. The anti-Zionist anti-Semitism, that is the type of anti-Semitism that kills the soul of the Jew. It disconnects strong connection to land. And if it sort of helps for those on the call today, that push for any peoples, that it's that push for disconnecting a people group from the land that they originate from. And to any group that is just it goes beyond the realm of bigotry, but in this case specifically anti-Semitism when disconnecting that Zionism from Judaism. And I want to kind of take us into those examples of erasure towards Jews, Israelis, Zionists, and where what we kind of see on campus, what we see in general. But I'll start with erasing Zionism for Judaism, just like uh, Jade said, really that disconnecting or trying to split Zionism from Judaism, even through terminology like, oh, I like Jews, just not Zionists. Well, that's really difficult considering 98% of Jews identify as Zionists. So that's this kind of push to disconnect, but it doesn't really make sense. And it's really sort of code for not liking Jews. And then I want to move to anti-Semitism on campus and um, highlight Jade's experience because Jade, they know best being a student on campus at UT Dallas, what that has looked like.
Yeah, it's been extremely difficult on campus. Jewish students have faced exclusion from public areas, vandalism, threats, and intimidation to the level which no one should ever have to experience or deal with. At my own campus, UT Dallas, a Jewish student's dorm was broken into. Students have been given death threats, me included, and there is frequent harassment on campus. What we see is campus newspapers misrepresenting Jewish concerns, giving disproportionate attention to anti-Zionist voices, and often promoting anti-Semitic rhetoric. I want to bring up a recent survey that was done by the American Jewish Committee. It's their 2024 State of Anti-Semitism report, in which they reported that 40% of Jews hide their identity to avoid hostility or anti-Semitism. 40% of Jews will erase their own identity just out of fear of their safety, out of fear that they are going to be targeted for being Jewish. Campus has always been a place of public discourse, but recently it has turned into a place for Jewish students filled with hate, filled with targeting, harassment, and there is a erasure of these Jewish concerns, these problems that very few, if any, take seriously.
Absolutely. And we see this becoming systemic on these campuses, but it's an institutional issue on college campuses around the world. The United States especially really hyper focused in Ivy League colleges, but really just colleges everywhere. And here's the problem is the people who are I mean, our young people are our future regardless, but especially when we're looking in the spaces of academia, these are our future leaders of thought and ideas. And when institutionally those spaces of academia are becoming really strongly anti-Semitic spaces, that poses a really difficult threat for the future of what will the future leaders in academia feel about Jewish people? What will future ideas and thoughts and conferences and this sort of academic disconnection from the Jewish community, isolating them in many ways. And I would like to highlight also making even spaces like this so much more important, and also make I can speak for myself that I'm just grateful to be here because I think spaces that uplift one another are just so important to learn about one another. Just it makes such a difference in this time. And one fact that I want to share as well is that 53% of American Jewish college students say that without any sort of escort or security, that they don't really feel comfortable going to college class to their college courses or to even on-campus events. That's 53% of students saying if there's not some type of security or some sort of safety measures being done to help them get to an event or class safe, they don't feel safe right now. And I want to move into delegitimization, which oftentimes can look like erasure through imagery, maps, and even erasing Israel. Before I do that, though, Jade, did you have anything else that you wanted to share, though, on anti-Semitism on campus?
Well, I mean, the statistic of not feeling safe, that
Yeah.
53%, I can personally attest to. There are so many times of which, without seeing any visible police officer, any security guard, where it is truly frightening to be on campus. And so I think you really got the point that Jews on college campuses are not feeling safe. And it's not just that they're not feeling safe, it's that they are not being heard.
Mhm.
And because of that, they are not being safe.
Absolutely. And oftentimes, when these things are reported, Jewish students feel dismissed, as a lot of their reports are dismissed, or said that admins are saying Jewish students are exaggerating, or that what they're feeling and experiencing isn't actually what they're feeling and experiencing. And that's also goes back to even the definitions when people say, "Oh, I'm not anti-Semitic, I'm just anti-Zionist," but then they go beat up a Jewish college student. What does that have to do with whatever thoughts they have on Israel, right? Or whatever thoughts they have on the Jewish state? And so I think it really becomes this major issue of Jewish safety on college campuses, but what happens when those college students graduate and go into the real and out into the real world outside of academia is does that spread outside of college campuses? And that's a big part of why we want to get uh, really fight this on college campuses now. And I imagine similarly to Hinduphobia, that's a daunting task, but one that is so important for both of our peoples. For delegitimization, we often see this again through sort of erasing maps of Israel or erasing imagery. But I'll start with sort of the myths. A myth would be Jews took Arab land. And then the fact would be Jews are indigenous to Israel. And that there are a lot of people from that region. Jews are indigenous to Israel and that Levant region specifically. And so there are Syrians and Lebanese that are from that region as well. There are many different Middle Eastern indigenous communities that have been affected by Arab conquests and Arab colonialism over time. And for this myth to push that Jews took Arab land is just so false. And history shows that. But we also have this issue of people trying to rewrite history. And I'll push the next example over to Jade.
A lot of things that I personally see on campus revolves around these chants and slogans that aim to erase the Jewish or Israeli identity or history. We have slogans like "From the river to the sea," and that chant is a call to erase the Jewish presence and a call for Israel's destruction. Calling it the land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, which is Israel, should be wiped from the map and then Arab state should be built on the ruins. Another chant that I frequently hear is "Globalize the Intifada." This represents calls for anti-Jewish violence under the guise of resistance, invoking the legacy of the first and second Intifada, which were periods of violent uprisings marked by suicide bombings, shootings, and terror attacks that deliberately targeted Israeli civilians. This phrase is calling for the erasure of Jews and Israelis across the globe. But the hard part about this is universities tolerate these slogans, making Jewish students feel unsafe. Your efforts to erase Jewish suffering, as Josh said, by denying or minimizing that anti-Semitic incident or violence is occurring at all.
Absolutely. And this sort of even erasure of what certain words really mean. You'll have, just like Jade said, people will come in and chant, globalize the Intifada. And then when a Jewish student, let's say, reports that and says, this is threatening towards the Jewish community, the student who chanted this will say, oh, well, intifada simply translates to uprising. Well, that may be the exact translation of that word, but like Jade said, that invokes this and brings up, and you'll see images right there of what the Intifada looked like, where there were bus bombings and pizza parlor bombings, and to explain the just how horrible these attacks were when people would go into, let's say, these pizza parlors, one image, that the image on the right there, they would pack the bombs with nails. And this was terrorists coming in from Gaza that would pack the bombs with nails so it would have a worse impact on the people around it. So they would ensure that there were no survivors. So essentially a bomb would explode and there would be nails and screws and bolts in it, so it would hurt people around even more so. And you see the bus bombings in addition, and Jewish people are we're no strangers to the idea that a lot of the violence we experience is violence against Jewish women. And I want to highlight that specifically because in the Intifadas, it was violence against Jewish women through terrorists coming in and in buses, stabbing Jewish women in the stomach, pregnant Jewish women in the stomach. I know that that is hard to grasp and it's a hard conversation to talk about, but that's what happened. And that is what, when Jews hear globalize the Intifada from some student on campus, that's what they're thinking about. And that's what people are invoking. And people chanting it know that. And if people don't, they're ignorant. I do, just timing's sake, want to move to erasure of Jewish and Israeli diversity and innovations. Really, one of the things that we see, and I'll let Jade speak to this as well, as because I'm sure Jade sees this a lot on campus, is the ways in which the Jewish community and the Israeli community is so diverse. Like I said, we're a multicultural group, understood more modernly as an ethnic group with a religious component, but really a group that more anciently understood as a tribal group, also with that religious component. And this misrepresentation of Jews and who we are and saying, oh, we're just a bunch of white colonialists. Well, that's very interesting because more than half of the Jewish community in the world are people of color. And it is this misinformation that feeds a narrative that Jews aren't from Israel or from where we are from. And I want to pass that over to Jade because I imagine Jade also sees this a lot on campus.
And you're right, I do see this very frequently, and that claim that Jews are these white colonizers ignores Mizrahi, Sephardic, and Ethiopian Jews. And the simplest fact is, Jews have been exiled from their homeland for over 1,000 years. This has caused Judaism to be a religion found in nearly every country that does not kill or prosecute Jews for their identity. Jews come from all over the globe, not because it started there, but because Jews had to constantly flee for their lives, find a way to live, so that one day they could return to their home. This myth that Jews are white colonizers also goes hand in hand to claim that Israel is an apartheid. And I hear this claim commonly on campus. And frankly, it's truly upsetting. Not only does this diminish the memory and horrific legacy of the actual apartheid in South Africa, but it erases and rewrites the current state of Israel's diverse population. Anyone who has been to Israel can tell you that it's not an apartheid. You can see it right when you land. And so this myth, both the myth that Jews are white colonizers or that Israel was an apartheid, erases and rewrites so much of Judaic history. Another thing is that these myths ignore Jewish refugees. More than 800,000 Jews were expelled from Arab lands. Yet, in conversation, this history is erased or ignored. Until the State of Israel was founded in 1948, Jews were without a home for thousands and thousands of years, constantly fleeing from one nation to the other, trying to find a place where they could simply live.
Absolutely. And one thing if you're ever approached with the apartheid claim, one mechanism that I think is a very important understand educationally to understand what is and isn't apartheid in very simple terms is when a small group is in charge of a large group. And in Israel, that is just not the case because the majority is Jewish. So if apartheid is small group in charge of large group of people, and Israel is majority Jewish, then that is not an apartheid, even in those most basic terms. In the most basic terms, but not to mention exactly what Jade said, also that it is so incredibly diverse. I mean, even when you see street signs, they're in Arabic, Hebrew, English. Every street signs, restaurants, uh, restroom signs and public spaces, just to contextualize that a little bit. And to wrap up, though, we have some resources here. I really want to highlight there's some amazing things from Stand With Us, from Hillel, from Ackerman Center for Holocaust Studies that are at UT Dallas. And then also linked is the International Holocaust Remembrance definition of anti-Semitism. And then I just want to highlight Stand With Us has a packet here that's 10 things Jews and Hindus have in common. That's something that will be in this guide that you can look to. That is free to download, but just want to point that out. And then I want to hand that over to Jade if Jade has anything that they'd like to share as we're wrapping up.
Well, I just want to say that this is not just about Israel. The erasure of the Jewish identity is an attack on truth, history, and academic integrity. We must challenge misinformation, educate others, and fight against the erasure of all forms of hatred. The Jewish people have survived every attempt to erase us. No amount of distortion, intimidation, or misinformation can change our history or our future. And so I thank you all for being here today to listen to us and to stand up. And I invite you to stand up against anti-Semitic rhetoric and engage in meaningful dialogue. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you all so much. And I am thrilled to take on this fight with you all. I think the beauty of today is this. I am learning so much about your community, and I hope this gave you all a chance to learn a little bit about us. And thrilled to work together to create a better world. And like Jade said, academic spaces as well. Thank you.
Dhanyavad, Jade ji and Josh ji, for sharing your perspectives and experiences. Your words remind us that erasure is not just about memory, it's about belonging, safety, and the right to exist without fear. The patterns you've described today, where Jewish history is rewritten, Israel is delegitimized, and Jewish students face hostility on college campuses, are deeply familiar to Hindu communities as well. We know what it means to have our history misrepresented, our sacred spaces dismissed, and our voices excluded from conversations that directly affect us. But what you have shown us today is that resilience is the antidote to erasure. By continuing to speak, to educate, and to reclaim the narratives that others try to distort, we make it impossible for history to be rewritten. Once again, let's give a heartfelt thank you to Jade G and Josh G for their hard work in combating anti-Semitism and for sharing these important insights with us today.